Hello and welcome to my Regalia deck profile. This is the deck list that came first place in BCS Italy 2022. It went undefeated during the day, but up until that point, I wasn't really sure on the list I want to go with. This is the list that I kind of had, kind of came up with as the sort of final list a few days before the event. But then I decided to, test some other changes, and then I didn't really feel comfortable with them, so then I went back to the original list. So to start with, we have one copy of Angelica. Honestly, I want to play a second copy. Space is a massive issue in this deck, with this specific list actually. And you'll kind of see how tight it was as we kind of go further in. One of the reasons to play at least one Angelica, because over here I have 3 Frag. One of the reasons was that if you see 2 copies of a Regalia Grade 3 that isn't CEO, which is obviously what you want to ride, at least if one of the 4 is Angelica, then I've got a choice between Frag and Angelica. Whereas otherwise, more often I'm just going to have like only 2 Frags in hand, and it just feels kind of like lame to pick between 2 Frags. So I sort of just want to take one Angelica. But the reason I went with Frag is that as the main one is because if my opponent damage rushes me, which is more like in this format now actually, I think, for people to push damage more early, the idea is that if I'm bricking so badly, then I can use Frag to check top 5 and look for a CEO. Honestly, I prefer Angelica in most situations, but Frag is better when you're losing the game badly, basically. So Angelica can't do anything when you're losing the game a lot, because she doesn't do any plussing, she doesn't do any searching or anything, whereas Frag can. And obviously, if you're getting rushed and beaten down, then you've got the counterblast to pay the cost for it. Obviously, being able to get out 4 gauges is always nice, up to 4 even. And Frag is obviously capped to 2. Her burning skill doesn't really work as easy as the healing skill, but honestly, you never use the healing or burning skill in almost every game. And there's also just the whole field control aspect, of course. Angelica, there was a game actually, funny enough, where I went against Link Joker, and the first damage I took was this one-off Angelica, and I looked at it, I was like, uh-oh, because Angelica is technically better against Link Joker, and I ended up riding Seer Yggdrasil because I wanted to protect my field during my opponent's turn, so that was to help me stop blocking, but it wasn't actually the locking version, it was the deleter version of the deck, so I basically just grade 2 gamed instead, and just in case, because I noticed, I think I might have seen Given or something, a drive check, I'm not even sure, but I saw something and it made me think, oh damn, this is deleters, so I decided to grade store, because that stride probably would have killed me. I think it would have, because I didn't have any heals in my hand, so that obviously helped, because the heal would have been used to get the G-Guard that -2 crit on the Vanguard stride, and that could have been handy, but my hand just wasn't prepared for that OTK play. So, good thing I decided to grade store, because I don't think I would have won. And then the 3 Frag, of course, which I've already now discussed, so this is not very good against Link Joker, but otherwise, she's decent, generally speaking. 4 copies of Seer Yggdrasil. This is basically like a rear guard. I actually want to play more grade 3s because I want to avoid running this card as much as I can. She does feel like she's supposed to be a rear guard card. Almost like in my mind, I want to treat her like a grade 2. So in turn, it almost feels like I'm playing 4 grade 3s, because riding this usually doesn't feel that great. Unless you have like 2 copies, then it's okay. But obviously, I don't play Flap Angel in this list. Unfortunately, I don't have space. So Flap Angel is great to try and fit in. And honestly, this list could still change after this, so I'm not really like 100% sold. But there are good arguments for playing these cards. And then 4 copies of Rujisa. So she's very helpful. She's kind of helped me a bit because I don't have Flap Angel to search for CEO. I managed to ride her in a few of my games and search out CEO of the top 5, which was pretty good. I did, I think, like 2 games in a row during the tournament, like early on. So that helped me a lot, because obviously if you ride CEO or if you start damage checking or soul charging, then you're in trouble. And this deck doesn't play Gleipnir, nor does it even play Flap Angel for that matter. So there's risks with that as well. And she's a soul charge 2 from drop, so that's very nice as well if you want to set up cards like Marduk or Varatrim or Minerva or Jagda Ragnar, etc., or Amaruda. Then we've got 4 copies of Norn. Norn is also a card you don't really want to ride. So even though she's got a good Vanguard skill, well, average nowadays by V standards, but it's +1 if you ride her. But obviously, Counterblast and also just having Norn as rear guard is obviously an opportunity cost there. So you don't really want to ride her, because when you ride one, you've got now one less in your deck. She's not like the original one where you felt better about riding it because later on you can Soul Blast and get 5k. You really do need that rear guard as much as you can, because it's kind of hard to get past some of the defensive hands that some decks can produce. Then there's 3 copies of Thread, so you can give Gauge for free, because otherwise the deck can get tripped over by Counterblast Denial, and because there's only one Angelica, there's even less ways of giving free gauges, so having Thread is kind of helpful for that reason in case of such plays. Also rushes your opponent in the early game, so if you do draw this, then it's good. It's also a draw 1 filter, so that can be useful too. And also can help with boosting or having attacks in the front row that you don't want your opponent to swing at next turn. Then 3 copies of Ratcham. So at this point you can now see that there's about 14 grade 2s. So this deck plays 8 grade 3s, 14 grade 2s, 10 grade 1s, and 1 Blitz Order. So this Ratcham, I needed it because there are some decks which are just really painful. Now the reason I chose this over Honolly is because this card works when it's drive checked, whereas Honolly, if you drive check Honolly, you're not doing anything with the Honolly, right? And also Honolly is awkward because when you place Honolly, you have to counterblast 1, and obviously to give Gauge after that, you need another counterblast unless you're playing Thread, which I've only got 3 copies of in this list. And obviously you miss out on Marduk because you would have used your counterblast by then. So unless you've got like a very nice VAR setup, maybe like multiple VARs, then you're just kind of cornering yourself. So Honolly actually comes at a greater cost. Even though you can make Honolly invincible, the card does hurt your plays. It does hold you back. So I prefer Ratcham because Ratcham is a hand trap and you can drive check into it. So you've got more opportunities to actually find it because of that. And it only matters when you're guarded during your opponent's turn. So that timing is really important, and I think that's what makes kind of a massive difference between Ratcham and Honolly. Even though Honolly is more effective in terms of how many attacks it can stop, Ratcham is more reliable. So for that I went with Ratcham, and you can disrupt all kinds of really dangerous cards in this game, so it's very good for that reason. Cards like Given, for example, or in the Murakumo cards, like if you're worried about Shadow Stitch, you can also deal with Pearl Sisters, even Chuchi Turua. There's quite a lot of stuff. Then we've got here, Skull Dragon as well. Skull Dragon is actually a big one because I've been playtesting against Grand Blue as well. And this deck can't survive Bartholomew without Ratcham. It's really hard, especially because of Urgula. Urgula can protect the rear guard in front. So if you're using the G guard for Genesis to -2 crit, you won't be able to do it on the Skull Dragon that they call out. And that's obviously a massive risk. So unless you've kept your damage like low somehow, which isn't that easy because there's a card called Ghost Ship, and obviously early game they can potentially rush you down, and they can get crits maybe as well because they do play high crits. So, and Night Rose as well can get multi-attacks with bigger numbers. So just all kinds of reasons you might not have low damage that quickly. So it's sort of more the reason, but I think with this card, it improves your matchup against Grand Blue. Then there's 2 copies of Ordinal. Ordinal is good for preventing deck out. And speaking of deck out, actually, going back to Ratcham, there's one game that I played. So there's actually 3 ways I could have won the game, but basically my opponent went into Bad Bounty. They had 6 cards in deck, and well, after using Bad Bounty, and then they went to Night Rose. So obviously Night Rose attacked Twin Drive. Before the Twin Drive happened, well, if you have 6 in deck, after Twin Drive, you'd have 4 in deck, right? So what I did was I had 3 of these in my hand, actually, and I called all 3 out and basically just made his deck size go to 3 cards. So 3 cards, and then perform drive check, and then go to 1 card, and then I just went to my turn past GG. But the other methods I could have done would have been the new Genesis Stride. I could have just won normally using Minerva. But yeah, 2 Ordinals. Ordinal is good for prevent deck out. The other reason I want to play more grade 3s actually was because of Ordinal, because it's much easier to find fuel. One of the tricks is to actually try and put grade 3s as a gauge under VAR, because that way you've got more outlets for putting grade 3s into drop zone besides just relying on the Minerva Stride, because you're not always going to go into Minerva. Sometimes you want to go into something else, and for that reason you kind of want to be a bit flexible. Obviously it means 1 less Regalia to play with. I think on first stride you only need like 3 Regalias anyway, so it's not going to be as big of a risk in the short term. So I'd probably consider just tucking your grade 3s as soon as you can into the VAR. And obviously, yeah, the big numbers can help you win games. Now, there are 4 copies of VAR, obviously counter charge and soul charging as well, and you can go mad because you've got 2 ordinals here. There's no way of actually searching ordinal. The only way you can retrieve ordinal is if you use the G-Guard GB1 one to return it to deck, and then maybe just use Frag if you want a consistent check top 5 search with what's left in your deck. You could maybe do it like that. Or you can use something like this, like a Stray or 4 Heavens, but that's not the main reason we're playing it. So there's 4 copies of this. This card is more of a filter, but it can soul charge. So just think of this like V-Series Ordinal, because when you write Ordinal, it's sort of like a +1. This card is not a +1. It's draw 1, and then you mulligan 1 from your hand to 1 for deck, but then you soul charge 2. So while you're not +ing 1 like with Ordinal, who can call itself out, this card is soul charging 2, which sort of makes up for not being a +1. And that helps you set up Marduk, of course, if you do ride this card. But then you're also doing an instant +1, whereas Ordinal is slow because Ordinal doesn't actually activate when you ride Ordinal. Or even when you call it, because you have to do it in the battle phase. You have to actually draw during battle. So if you ride Ordinal, you have to wait until you're on grade 2, but then you have to wait also into the battle phase. And that makes it slow, because that means by that point, the card that you have and that you're planning to play around, you won't even be able to do it until the moment you reach grade 3. So you can't even pre-plan. Whereas Astraea, it's instant. So if you ride this, you've got it like... You can basically make use of the card 2 turns earlier because of that. Because it's an instant plus. Or instant draw even. And of course you can also return triggers to your deck, which is also handy. Or even just weak shield. If your opponent might be more aggressive, then you could potentially just put in anything like quick shield or whatever back. This helped me actually. I know like the game that I won in the top 8, which was definitely the hardest game of the day, was against Murakumo. And I basically rode this card and I put the Overtrigger from my hand after Mulligan. I drew into the Overtrigger. I put it on the bottom of my deck because I was thinking, you know what, it's Murakumo. Having big tanky shields isn't really as important, so I could probably just put the OT back. And when I got to my Marduk play, basically my opponent got the damage Overtrigger, and then that obviously took a lot of wind out of my sails, because that obviously helps with building up more combo pieces for the Murakumo combos and everything. Obviously combo pieces, trying to make them drop them is one of the big weaknesses of Murakumo. And that left me in a situation where I think it might have been an OT for game situation. I'm not entirely sure, but I heard there was 3 perfect guards or something in the opponent's hand, so it definitely would have been hard. And the hand was building quite massively. So that kind of saved me in a way, because obviously then any cheap shields can't really be used. And that OT that I put at the bomb kind of just came full circle and won the game. So yeah, this card is very good for just returning stuff, maintaining the drive checks in deck, because Regalia, one of the big weaknesses, which I'm sure a lot of people who've played Regalia have noticed, is that you do run out of triggers, unless you're playing Dreaming Dragon, but Dreaming Dragon's a turn slow, and I think speed matters. Obviously, the reason I didn't really want to play Dreaming Dragon was because I want the game to end fast, and it's also why I didn't play Regalia Perfect Guards. So as you can see, I'm playing a Blitz Order here. This is the end of the normal unit, so this is the last normal unit I'm playing. We've already kind of maxed out. The thing is with Regalia Perfect Guard is it's GB1, and obviously she's quite good with Regalia Perfect Guards because she can Soul Blast it potentially after you use Marduk. Because the GB1, it's the same problem as with Taro. Like why Taro wasn't really that great with Marduk is that Taro still made you still had to rely on like another rear guard like Gleipnir, which was a nuts card, to actually be able to Soul Blast. And Gleipnir was only like Soul Blast 1, so it's much easier to meet the numbers. And that was kind of like what made it work better. But obviously Jotun is the same thing. If you have Gleipnir in this deck, which I'm not playing in this list, but otherwise you can play Astraea, who's an additional Soul Blast, by the way, which makes it a bit trickier. Then you can use that to kind of get back your PGs, but I didn't opt for it in the end. I wanted to just go fast. So this is sort of why the deck is vulnerable to over triggers, because obviously the perfect guards are great, but it's also just in part because of the battle door skills, because battle doors are kind of annoying, and Blitz Order, having a 5th card in deck that can counter battle doors besides the heal triggers, is also nice as well. So we basically have 5 cards we can draw into. Vracham also kind of helps a bit with battle door skills as well. So we've got some counters against cards like Bartholomew or Morfessa and so on. So that's helpful to have as well. And then, of course, Blitz Order. I pretty much sort of explained this now. Regalia crits because I want to go max critical. And this is actually quite good for drawing a card. So yeah, it's sort of a GB1. It's not actually GB1 written. It's more like if you have a face-up unit. But this is useful because you can still soul charge even if you're not on GB to meet the numbers for the soul if you're lacking. So I don't really think this is worth taking out. The crits are still good. I mean, the alternative would have been for me to just play Tablet Angel, which is also GB1. So, or just play any of the 10k power crits, which might have been unnecessary. So I think this is probably the right crit to play because it still helps you in the long game if you do go to long game, quite massively at that. Or even if your opponent has ring grade 3 first, it's very good for that. And it's not as likely that this, a random trigger that has 5k power is going to bite you as much. I think it's more likely to save you at times more than it will bite you back. And then there's 4 copies of Mushu, which is a Stride Assist crit, because I'm not playing enough grade 3s and I really need to Stride, and I don't want to drop CO to Stride in the process, because that would be bad. 3 copies of Thviti. So Thviti is the other Sentinel. Since I don't have space, I do not want to play draw PGs. First, you can deck out more easy. Secondly, you lose your crit pressure in the process. Kind of dangerous. I kind of want to be able to threaten your opponent with crits because that's how I make my opponent guard with combo pieces. And if I make them guard with combo pieces, then I slow down the game. And that means then that I don't have to deal with like super dangerous OTKs as easily. So, and then over trigger, because 2 100 millions is crazy when you've got restanding cards. Especially Minerva, like 3 attack Minerva and 3 attack rear guard. Then there's 4 heal triggers. So the 4 heals, obvious reasons for that one. I just want to live. And then we've got the starting Vanguard. So now that that's been done, let's get into the G zone. So for the G zone, we got 4 copies of Minerva. I'm not sure why the quick shield is here. Let's just get this out of there. This is actually quite a bit of a mess. It seems like I've just kind of just clumped things in after the tournament. So 4 Minervas, because she's decent any time in the game, really. And then 1 Dismal, because Dismal is very good for protecting. Honestly, this should be in the back, but I haven't really ordered it properly because I just put this in a different deck profile and then I just kind of just shoved it into my deck box afterwards. But that's obviously important because you protect your Sea Yggdrasil. 1 copy of Marduk, because Marduk, he can basically Soul Blast 6, Can Blast 1, which is kind of costly just to place him on. But the fact that you can restore your drive checks and go back to 3 drives can potentially then give you a chance to get your crits, and then your rear guard becomes more threatening, which then forces your opponent to drop cards. Otherwise, you're enabling Generation Break 1, which can help with meeting conditions for this card as well at times. And that's kind of also good for like filtering in. So if you get something like Veratrum, for example, or G Guardians, anything of the sort, Marduk's also good for that because you're finding cards as well to help you kind of defend, because it's not really easy to defend after you high roll with Regalia. Amaruda. So Amaruda is good for guaranteed 10k crit. Can soul charge, but obviously you've got to be careful because that can also deck you out as well. But we've got 2 Ordained Owls for a reason. Obviously, if you go into Amaruda, unless you do the Soul Blast 15 and succeed at it, you don't actually have a way of putting your grade 3s from Soul to drop zone, because that is to fuel Ordained Owl, because you're not using Minerva's main phase Soul Blast 3. You're not using even actually Jag Dragon, same thing without the new Stride. These cards you kind of have to be careful with. It's also more the reason why I mentioned earlier in the video that if you have grade 3s in Soul and you've got VAR, I would just try and prioritize moving grade 3s into VAR to then retire your equip gauge, because if you do that, then you don't have to worry about which Stride you go into, because otherwise you're going to find yourself locked in on Minerva just so you can make use of Ordained Owl, which isn't as ideal. So it's really just having that flexibility to go into Strides that don't have main phase Soul Blast, and maybe rely on battle phase Soul Blasting instead, or maybe just don't even Soul Blast at all, because 15 Soul is quite tricky. But obviously, if you can achieve this, you can also get around some decks that have heavy Sentinels. So Amaruda is also good for that. If your opponent's on low damage, I don't think Amaruda is as great, because damage triggers does kind of mess with this a bit. And then we've got 2 copies of Earth. So Earth is quite handy because obviously if your opponent's been using Sentinels or has soul charged them in DI or something, then you can threaten them with massive numbers and crits, and then they could just lose the game. Like, you could just steal games with this card just because of where things went. So yeah, if you're playing against especially a soul charge deck, just keep an eye out for chances of that happening. Like Pale Moon, for example, actually is a good case of looking out for PGs as well, or even just damage checks and things like that, or milling decks. Grand Blue, although Grand Blue, actually I think Grand Blue is a bad example. That's the last deck I'd use this against. I don't think I use it at all against Grand Blue because they have G guards that can revive, so it's quite a hurdle. It's very unlikely you ever go into it in that matchup. But then there's Jagdragna. This card's really good, by the way. This card helped Regalia more than it helped any other Genesis deck, which is why why Tara should be unbanned. But yeah, that's a whole other topic for another day. I don't think they realize how exactly they're going to make other Genesis decks feel as decent as Regalia because of how the framework of the clan's gone. So any support that's generic for Genesis, unless they know the kind of like subtleties that of how this clan was designed, because I'm guessing it's a new design team and they don't know anything about what their predecessors have done, then you're not going to be able to actually support this deck properly. Then anything that they get that's generic probably helps Regalia just as much, if not more, and that's basically what happened here. This card does get some really funny wins as well. It's very good because if you don't have Regalia pieces, enough Regalia pieces to use Minerva, then you can kind of rely on this. It's also good against decks that have like meaty G-Guard shields. So you might find that Minerva's not actually worth going into because your opponent has like heals in their hand or something. And because of that, you might find, okay, well, they don't play Perfect Guard G-Guardians, so I'll just use this to break their shields and helps with that. And you can also deck your opponent out with it sometimes, but, well, I don't think I've ever done it, but I could have done it against Grand Blue. Musespell. Musespell is really helpful because you countercharge. So I actually use this to win one of my games during the day because of the countercharge. Because basically I got damage denied, and the thing is that damage denying is very effective against Regalia because it stops your opponent from being able to use Norn's skill. It's sort of partly why I want to play Thread as well. But then what do you do if you don't have Thread? Well, then if you've at least got your opponent on grade 3, then you could at least go into Musespell. And then with Musespell, you can then countercharge, and then you can use Norn to then counterblast, or Yggdrasil, and then add your gauges back in again. And now you've got your 4 attack whatever turn, or I don't think it was a restand in my case, I can't remember, but it's still helpful. It saves you, so I think people should play this. I think not playing it is a mistake because you're giving your opponent more ways of countering you very easily, and if you lose your momentum, if you lose control of the game, your opponent will win easily. So you've got to be very careful of that. Then you've got 2 copies of Ear because she can basically soul charge 4. I've actually cut Iris because I don't have space for Iris. The thing is that I thought of is I'm not quite as obsessed with getting soul now as before, so, and that's partly because of Jagdragna, because Jagdragna gives me now an alternative stride. If I don't aim hard on using the Minerva stride, I can at least fall back on Jagdragna. Like, it's not the end of the world if I can't use Minerva. Whereas before it used to be kind of bad if I couldn't use Minerva. But now we've got another good second stride, or turn 4 stride. So that's really helpful as well. And because of that, I only need to soul charge a couple cards to get the 5k shield. I can just bite the bullet on soul charging one of my cards in the worst case scenario. So that's why I decided to cut Iris in the process. And of course, maximum Ear is great, and it's quite easy to get the conditions anyway for 4 and drop. But you have to be very careful when you're playing this clan, because how you soul blast and everything, it's a massive deal. Or even sometimes how you guard, or how you provide equip gauges. Like, you have to pay attention to all that stuff, because eventually you need to know what's actually going to end up in the drop zone by the end of the turn, and also your discard costs when you restand with Norn. And by knowing what ends up in the drop zone, you can then meet the conditions of your G Guardians, especially Ear. Ear is definitely still a great G Guard to use, in fact, because you don't always need to -2 crit. This is a costly G Guard. You have to -3. And if you think it's just overkill, then obviously you don't use it. But this card is still very important, and that's why we play 2 copies, because actually I think the main reason I'm playing 2 is because of Bassador's skills, because of Steam Maidens. So Steam Maidens is a big part of the reason I'm playing 2. You could also make use of this against Bartholomew, but I think Steam Maidens, since they have the piano, they can basically make guarding super annoying, and Shlishma is more dangerous than anything you're seeing with Steam Maiden V format. Like, if you think Steam Maidens in V is super strong, Premium Steam Maidens is it's definitely a lot more dangerous. Actually, they've I think they got first and second over the weekend as well. But it was kind of like about time, really, because I do think that deck is sort of being slept on as well. Shlishma can basically call 2 units during a battle, and also Shlishma can call herself from G-Zone, so if she's being flipped face up, you can basically get her out again. And obviously with some of the time leaping stuff that the deck can do, you can sort of set up like multiple cycles of attacks, which is more than the V version, because the V version is sort of like one attack chain that you're spamming, but in Premium you could potentially like go into a double attack chain because of Shlishma, and because of all the little time leap gimmicks that they can do as well with Melon or TikTok or whatever. Honestly, I can't remember the whole combo off the top of my head, but it's very dangerous, and also part of the reason I play Vratram as well is because of that matchup. And then lastly, we've got Witch Queen of Accomplishment Laura, because it's always good to have an anti-deck out card as well, but also putting key normal units back, like Norn, for example, or I guess Yggdrasil, if you haven't seen your All-Day Nows, is also good. You kind of need this, and you don't always need Soul, so more the reason to have access to something that does something different to just Soul Charging, because most stuff does Soul Charge. And that's more or less it. So that's my entire Regalia deck profile done. And I guess just, yeah, let me know like how you find it, what kind of alterations maybe you've been doing with your decks or your variants, I guess. And until then, I guess subscribe if you want to see more deck profiles from time to time for Oracle and Regalia or Genesis. Well, not as much Genesis, but probably more Regalia. I mean, I do still mess around with Genesis. I will keep an eye out and see if there's any like worthwhile lists to put out. But until then, I will see you guys later. Bye.